Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. It's an honour to be here, and yes, an honour to start the day. I'm going to do a very high-level introduction to the safety of autonomous systems. I'll cover some architecture, I'll cover some testing, but I'm sure we'll go much more into the depth of the verification and validation a bit later. One of the reasons I am here talking about autonomous systems is that I'm leading the ISO working group or project, which is actually currently looking at defining autonomous systems and defining frameworks for autonomous systems. Before I go any further, I'd like to actually show an example of some autonomous systems working in Argentina. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Taking the cutest that I've ever seen. You'll have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Mr. Sandman, someone to hold. Would be so peachy before it's too old. So please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Well, if we can get it to work like that in Seoul, it would speed up our commuting times really impressively. Of course, that's not quite the reality of today, but maybe in a few years, if we believe the makers of autonomous cars. So what I'm going to do is initially do a very quick high-level introduction to what I believe are autonomous systems, look at how we can specify objectives for autonomous systems in a safe manner so that they don't cause any harm. Look at online and offline machine learning, because what we're being promised with autonomous cars is not what we would hope to get in 30 or 40 years. Look at some challenges if we're actually looking at machine learning. Look at the different types of testing very briefly, and what I believe is the necessity of really special test environments if we're actually going to feel safe with these systems in the real world. So, introduction to these. As I say, I'm leading a group that's trying to actually define what autonomous systems are, and you would think that the definition, and that's our current definition at the bottom of the screen there, would be really easy. We're now 5 weeks into actually coming up with this definition, and it changes every week. We want the systems nowadays to be intelligent or smart systems that can learn from their experiences, but what we thought of as intelligent and smart 40 years ago or even 20 years ago is quite different from what we think of as an intelligent system today. So our definitions are slightly changing. And the definition that my group is going to come up with, we're now actually limiting how long we would expect it to be valid. We would only expect it to be valid for perhaps 10 to 15 years, beyond which systems will change so greatly that we will need to come up with better and more up-to-date definitions. But what we want is systems, and we're expecting them to be smart, as I'll explain in a moment. We expect them to be able to work without human intervention. So if it's a true autonomous system, we don't want a human having to watch what it's doing all the time and actually have to take control within less than a second if something goes wrong. So a true autonomous system, we should be able to, if it was an autonomous car, get in the car and it take us from one place to another without us having to intervene at all. We're actually not anywhere close to that at the moment. Of course, we have a number of autonomous systems that are available to us. There's lots of work going on in the marine environment. We have unmanned aircraft which have to work without human intervention at times because we lose communication with them. Recently, in the United States, they lost a drone for several hours, which they believed had crashed into the mountains because it had gone outside its operational parameters. They then found it on the other side of the mountains because its artificial intelligence had managed to actually work out a way of flying through the mountains without crashing, which it shouldn't have done. And they believe it just crashed in the end because it ran out of fuel. Obviously, there are safety implications there if we lose control of these systems and they don't get specified as to what they're supposed to do, then they're going to do some strange things. In that case, they believe that it was trying to fly back to one of its previous bases because one of its safety overrides was that if it lost communication, it goes back to its base. And they hadn't programmed in the latest base into the system. Many people in Korea have autonomous vacuum cleaners. In UK, we have lots of autonomous or robotic lawnmowers. Of course, they only have a tiny amount of artificial intelligence in them, if at all. Stuff that we send to Mars, well, we have such a long lag to actually control those things. We have to build some autonomy into those systems. And at the bottom of the screen there, you can see we've got autonomous cars, autonomous agriculture at the bottom right, and with less safety implications, I guess, we've got the systems actually controlling our stock markets now. So lots of autonomous systems out there, and many, if not all of them, have the potential to cause us harm. So at a very high level, we can build a framework for these systems. The systems obviously have to get information from the outside world. So we have sensors on the far left there. We then have to make sense of that information coming in. Once we can make sense of the information, the system can then do some decision making. Once it decides what to do, then it actually has to control some actuators to actually cause something to happen. And this is basic framework for most of our autonomous cars that we would, or if not all of the autonomous cars we're expecting to see on the roads in the next few years. Of course, I said that our autonomous systems have to be smart, so there needs to be some artificial intelligence in there. And then the question is, across this framework, how much of it do we make smart? Some of the autonomous car systems have AI that goes across the full range. So it's taking information perhaps from cameras. If we take a really simple example, and NVIDIA have actually got a really simple example that works after less than 100 hours of training, and it actually works from the cameras all the way through to moving the steering wheel. So we have AI controlling the whole 3 activities there. Other organizations are looking at AI and limiting it to parts of that. What we've basically found is that image recognition stuff we can't do without the artificial intelligence. So nearly always we're going to need that for the sensing and making, understanding the situation. And then maybe we can make the decision making less artificial intelligence, because that way it makes it easier for us to actually control, easier for us when it goes wrong to actually identify why it went wrong and how to correct it. Because as we'll see, these machine learning systems are quite difficult to interpret. So we have a number of choices. Now, if we actually look at how these autonomous systems are going to advance over time, if we actually go and ask the AI researchers, who I would guess should know the best about how the systems are going to advance, what we can see is that the aim is to give them more and more intelligence until they get to high-level machine intelligence. High-level machine intelligence would mean they're as good, if not better, than human. If they get as good as a human and they can make decisions like humans and they have access to practically unlimited processing power and they have access to practically unlimited data, then the rate at which those systems are going to advance, we can't predict, because that's actually just beyond us as humans, because the systems are just better than us at that point. Therefore, the safety implications then are really high. We don't know if we can control them. If we put an off switch on them, the machines will know that they've got an off switch. If they know they've got an off switch and they don't want to be turned off, they'll just disable the off switch. So at that point, we've lost control. Many people are considering whether or not, or how we actually cope with that, but that's beyond the scope of the talk. The graph here shows what the AI researchers believe is the rate of advance to achieving this high-level machine intelligence. And they basically, as a group, decided that by 2061, there was a 50% chance that we would have achieved this level of intelligence in these systems. Well, that's not actually within my lifetime, unless something really weird happens. So maybe I shouldn't worry about it too much, but there's far younger people in the room than me. If you just look at the Asian researchers are either more optimistic or pessimistic, depending on your point of view. The Asian researchers into AI reckon that by 2046, there's a 50% chance of us achieving that. Well, that might be in my lifetime, so maybe that should give me some cause to worry. If you actually ask the same AI researchers, what's the chance when these systems reach this level of intelligence of a bad outcome, then they think there's a 15% chance of a bad outcome. And by a bad outcome, we're talking about apocalypse for the human race. They're going to kill, the AI systems are going to kill the humans. So this is your Terminator scenario. So, if I believe the Asian stuff, by the end of my life, if I live that long, I'm probably going to get killed by an AI. 15% chance of being killed by the AI, which makes me wonder about how much I should pay into a pension. So if we're going to have these systems which are intelligent and I'm going to trust them to actually make decisions, I have to actually be able to tell these systems what I want them to do. So I have to be able to specify the objectives for these systems really carefully. And as it says there, it has to be safe. Now I think, well, in Greek mythology, there's the myth of King Midas, which I think you also have the same idea in Korea, where King Midas wanted everything he touched to turn to gold. And if you're a very good entrepreneur in Korea, you have the Midas touch. Of course, when you have that Midas touch, it comes with limitations. you don't literally want everything you touch to turn to gold. King Midas, though, in the Greek myth, he asked for everything he touched to turn to gold. And here you can actually see a picture of him, and he touched his daughter, and his daughter turned to gold. Well, that actually wasn't what he wanted, but that's what he had actually originally asked for. So he had to be really careful what he asked for. And of course, everything he touched when he went to eat something turned to gold as well. He couldn't get a drink, he couldn't get anything to eat, and every time he touched a member of his family, they were frozen in gold. So he had to be, we need to be careful when we ask these systems to do things for us, that we ask for something that we truly want to get, and we take into account the side effects. So you can imagine that we've had a busy day. We ask our autonomous system at home, make me dinner while I'm being driven home in my fully autonomous car, and presumably I'm working on the way home because that will give me, the autonomous car gives me the option of doing that. And my autonomous system thinks, which is running my house, thinks, okay, I'll do that. And then it looks in the refrigerator, and the refrigerator's empty. Now, we've just recently got a new pet. But when we actually asked our system to make me dinner, what we didn't say was, make me dinner, but don't touch the new puppy. The autonomous system can see the puppy now, and it's thinking, oh, there's a good source of protein. There's nothing in the fridge. I'll use that. The autonomous system has no idea of the sentimental value of the puppy to me. I'd be quite happy to go hungry for a week rather than my puppy not be there when I get home. So when I actually tell the autonomous system to make me dinner, I have to be careful that it doesn't say, okay, that's my priority, and that's what I'm going to aim for, and I'm going to ignore everything else. So when I specify this objective, I have to be very careful. I could tell the autonomous system I want it to keep the kitchen clean. Well, I've still got the puppy. Let's imagine that I persuaded it not to feed me the puppy for dinner. But the autonomous system now has got an objective of keeping the kitchen clean. Now, it's a puppy, so it's going to make a mess. Now, as far as the autonomous system's concerned, this puppy is now standing in the way of its objective. So I'm going to reward the autonomous system for keeping the kitchen clean. One of the ways that the autonomous system might decide to keep the kitchen clean is to eliminate the puppy, because no puppy, no mess. And in fact, when people have done experiments with AI systems, they can see that the AI systems try and do what's known as reward hacking. We give them a reward. We say, okay, we're going to reward the system if you can achieve this goal. Now, we want the autonomous systems, as they get more intelligent, to be innovative. We want them to come up with new ways of doing things, ways that perhaps we don't think of ourselves. But of course, if we don't think of them, we can't tell the systems, oh, you can keep the kitchen clean, but don't do it this way, because that's actually going to have a bad side effect. And as I've mentioned, even if I'm close by and I can see the system doing something, if it's clever enough, it will prevent me turning it off, unless I've told it that it has to allow that all the time. It might just think, oh, I'll keep the kitchen clean, high power hose through the kitchen, but of course this has side effects. It floods the apartment below. It shorts all my electrics. So there are side effects that have to be considered as well. And maybe the autonomous system can't take those into account. So when I specify the objectives, I have to be really careful. If I've got reinforcement learning, I set the autonomous system objectives, I set it rewards, and it can hack those rewards. There can be side effects. So what we need are autonomous systems that actually take account of human values. We don't want them to break those human values. Now, that means I can give feedback to the system, ideally, and say, okay, that's a good way of doing things. That other way is a bad way. Don't do it that way. I can get the autonomous systems to watch humans and see what humans do. Well, actually, when we have set systems and allowed them on the internet to actually interact with real humans, they learn really bad habits very quickly. Microsoft had to turn off one of their systems after less than 2 days because it had become racist and it was learning from the wrong people. So we want really good humans to interact with it. Because human values, even if we're good humans, change over time. When I get to the first week of January, my objective will be to lose weight because I'm too fat. However, when I'm tired and I get home to my apartment, I just want something to eat. I don't want to go out for a run. I don't want to go and do some exercise. So my objective in the first week of January is fine. It's a really good objective. But that objective, when I get home on maybe the 10th of January and I'm very tired, is not to go out for a run. It's to eat a snack and sit in front of the television. So my objectives change. Therefore, if our autonomous systems are learning from us, they have to recognize that those objectives will change. And of course, we also don't always have the best role models. So, MIT have this project going on, the moral machine, and this is cut from their slides, their website, and I've made some of the bits bigger to make it easier to see. And they've had more than 2 million people go to this website because what they're trying to do is actually understand what humans want an autonomous car to do in different situations. So they give you the situation, and you can all go to this, and you can all put your input in, and they give you scenarios, and you get to decide what you want the autonomous car to do. So in our situation here, we've got an autonomous car, and it's coming down the road, and there's a dog crossing one part of the road, and there's a criminal crossing another part of the road. Human criminal crossing another part of the road. And you get given 2 choices. You've got to kill one of them. You can either kill the dog, or you can kill the criminal. Over 2 million people have done this. So, what would be your choice? Dog, criminal? Let's jump round. Well, it depends. To me, it would partly depend on the dog. If the dog looks like this, let's go for the dog. And of course, it might depend on how bad the criminal was. But if we actually look, and of course, we could have killed a cat as well. Maybe if we had a third option. And it would depend how cute the cat was. If we actually look at the results from these more than 2 million people, what we can see, if you look down here at the bottom, they decided, these are humans, decided that actually they'd prefer the dog to live than the criminal. which to me seems a rather bizarre choice. So you're saying a dog is more valuable than a human criminal. So maybe if we are specifying objectives for these autonomous systems, maybe we don't let all humans actually make that decision, because we come up sometimes with some quite unusual decisions. And you can see at the top there, the thing that will get saved most often is the pushchair with the baby in it, which seems reasonable. And then we have an age thing. And generally the females do better than the males, unless you're a doctor. So I'm really glad I've got the PhD now, because I come just ahead of a female doctor. Why? And as you get older, men are more valuable than women. Again, no idea why. So we have to be really careful when we set the objectives for these systems. Maybe this is what we want. Maybe we just set the system to do everything that the vast majority of humans want. Or maybe we have to actually employ a set of other people to make those decisions for us, who we trust to make better decisions. So getting autonomous systems that are at a level where they can actually do things at the same level as us is, as we saw, somewhere in the future. Maybe 2050, 2060, we'll have that. In the meantime, we've got systems, and we're promised by the autonomous car makers that we'll be having those systems within, well, depending on which car manufacturer it is, 2, 3, 5 years. So what's the difference? Well, if we look at an autonomous car and we've got really futuristic systems, we put the neural network in the car and it can start making decisions. As it makes decisions, it's driving around, it's gathering experiences, and it's learning from those experiences. We use the experiences to generate the neural network, and if it's learning in real time, then we're having to test in real time as well. As we test in real time, okay, the neural network is okay, it meets our criteria for safety, it's updated, and our system is getting better all the time. This will not be happening anytime soon. This is not what we're expecting in 2 to 5 years. Much more likely, in the short term, is offline learning. Now we have a fleet of autonomous cars. At some particular time each day, or perhaps when they're at rest outside their homes with good internet access, they send in their experiences. Those experiences go to the OEM. The OEM then trains a new neural network, and the neural network is updated. We then do the offline testing. Now the testing will take a long time because these are safety critical systems. We're not good at doing testing really quickly. So this is going to take some time. We're not going to test them in a day. Therefore, we'll get an update, and maybe once a month, we could send an updated system out across the cloud, and we would have an over-the-air update, and our autonomous systems would all get updated with that new neural network. This is much more likely in the short term. One of the problems we have if we have this architecture, this framework, is what happens when we notice that our autonomous systems are doing something weird that's actually dangerous. If they're doing something dangerous and we immediately know that they're doing something dangerous because we're monitoring what the systems are doing, and of course we'll be getting each of these autonomous cars to report back to us whenever an incident occurs, and that should be part of the regulatory framework for these autonomous cars. So we now know that something bad happens, We also know that it normally takes us a month to do an update because it takes us that long to do the testing. What do? Because we now know they're unsafe. We also now know that we can't test them in less than a month. So do we just stop every one of those systems actually working? And if it's a generic scenario that could apply to every autonomous vehicle, do we stop every autonomous vehicle in the world working for a month while we fix it? Well, if we did that, that's the safe way to do it, but our economies would all crash. Now no one gets to go anywhere because our cars are all stuck, and not just our cars, presumably we've got autonomous systems in our public transport infrastructure as well. So these systems generally are built on the basis of machine learning. So they have artificial intelligence, and a subset of that is machine learning. And what a lot of the systems are using at the moment is known as deep learning. So we have what's generated is a deep neural net. And it's called deep purely because it has a number of layers, and the layers are hidden from us. We can't actually see those layers. That causes us problems in terms of testing and in terms of debugging, because if we can't really see what's going on in those yellow nodes in the neural network, it's really difficult for us to tell what's gone wrong and how to fix it. But I'll cover that in a moment. As I said earlier, nearly all of our systems, when they're trying to understand their environment in the sensing part of the framework, are actually using machine learning. And here you can see we've got an example. What we do is we label lots of information, in this case trees, buoys, pumps, and this is a training set. We give the system the training set and it generates a neural network. The idea being that if we now give it a different image, and that image doesn't appear in the training set, then the neural network can generalize and say, oh, from what you've told me, that looks like a boy. And this works. This technology is relatively good. Of course, there are problems with it, or potential problems with it. If we do this, we give it this training set, we have to decide what framework we're going to use to actually build our neural network and what parameters we're going to use. And we train the network and we generate our neural network. We have to have a completely different set of data to do the testing. And the testing then tells us how accurate our neural network is. And if it's not accurate enough, we go round in a loop iteratively until we get a network that is good enough. Now, some organizations are actually classifying images, classifying things like what do lines look like in the road, so we can get autonomous cars to actually follow the lines. But we need to know what everything looks like in our environment for autonomous cars. And you can imagine we could have people sitting at home looking at images and classifying all these different images that they've got so that we can then use these to actually teach the neural network. And as you can see, I've actually highlighted two in green here. You have the same word for that in Korea. So this is going to be a bit confusing. Of course, if you're doing this in Korea, and then you're then selling the data to United States, the UK, somewhere where we're using English anyway, in this situation, you end up with some problems. Of course, we typically don't get that many elephants walking around, but you could be driving past a zoo, I guess, or you could be driving through Africa. Now the classification problem is much more complex, because we can label all these things. If we're using English language, though, how do we differentiate? We need a much more intelligent bit of machine learning to actually identify the differences between all these different things. And you can also imagine if we're doing classification examples in a particular language, then even if we use humans for doing the translation to another language, it could cause us problems. So we need to check that the training data that we're using is good enough. We can have biased training data, overfitting, underfitting, etc. So one of the things we have to be really careful of is that the data we use for the training doesn't bias our system. Now no one's really sure if this is a real example or an urban myth, but the Americans wanted a system to be able to recognize Russian tanks. Well, let's just make it even simpler. Let's imagine we were building a system and we wanted it just to recognize tanks. We could feed it in all of this data. Then after a while, let's test the system. So let's give it a picture of a tank and see what it says. Well, actually it says it's not a tank. So what's gone wrong with this system? Why doesn't it think that's a tank? And it's not because it's two different colours. The reason is, when they sent people out to take pictures of tanks, people only went out to take pictures of tanks when it was sunny, because that was a good time to do it. Why would you go out in the rain and take pictures? All of the pictures have tanks with blue skies. Therefore, the system has learned not what the shape of a tank is, it's learned that if the pictures it's given us have blue sky, then there must be a tank in it. As soon as we give it a picture of a tank with clouds, well, that can't be a tank because all my other examples have got blue sky. So we have to be careful that we don't bias the system. We also have problems if our data sets are incomplete. We could be having a system that we wanted to identify swans. And we give it pictures of swans in different situations. It learns. And then we give it a picture of a black swan, which only occur in Australia. And of course, as soon as it sees the black swan, well, of course, that can't be a swan because it's not white. All my training data tells me swans are white. So we have to make sure that the training set that we give it is complete enough. So we have to give the systems enough training data, enough test data, and the two sets have to be absolutely independent. Otherwise, the testing won't work. What we find is that actually giving the training set real-world data can sometimes be confusing to it. So a lot of the time, it's actually best to give it synthetic data, data that we've actually looked at ahead of time and made sure is showing the system what we want it to learn. But of course, that adds cost because we actually have to create this synthetic data ourselves. When we choose the framework, we have to be very careful that we choose the best framework. There are a number of frameworks available to us. If we're building safety-critical systems, then the tools that we use for those safety-critical systems, if we're following standards, for instance, for building cars, have to be safety-critical frameworks. There are no frameworks for building these machine learning systems that have been qualified as being good enough for safety critical. So that's one of the things that we need to do as an industry, is actually make sure that we have got full confidence in the frameworks we're using to build that. Sorry, I don't read Korean, so I'm not sure what that says. Yeah. So if we actually look at choosing these, what we see is that the Google people, so these are quotes actually from the Google AI scientists. These are the people building some of the actual best systems in the world, are saying that actually when we choose these models, when we choose the parameters for these, it isn't science, it's alchemy. We're not sure that we're getting the best systems. So if we're building these systems, we've got problems with the testing. We've already seen that setting the objectives is difficult, therefore defining expected results is difficult. The systems will be probabilistic. That means they'll be non-deterministic. That again makes the testing more difficult. It means our regression testing, at the bare minimum, is really much more expensive. And the systems are going to be complex. Imagine we've got a sensor on an autonomous car, and it's on a journey of 100 kilometers, but it's in the rain. At the beginning of the journey, our sensors are giving us really good information. As the journey continues, they degrade. At which point do we want our autonomous system to actually say, okay, I can't actually work any further? And this means, given the number of sensors going into our autonomous cars, the number of test cases and the number of combinations is extremely large. I think the easiest and the best approach we've got available to us at the black box level now is to actually use back-to-back testing. So if we're actually testing one autonomous system, then we build a second autonomous system to do the same thing. We build it independently, and then we compare the two sets of results. If they both match, we have some level of confidence. If it's safety critical, maybe we build a third system, and then we've got potentially a voting system, and maybe this looks similar to our architecture. On the white box side, well, I'm not going to go into depth because I'm running out of time. Here's our neural network. When signals go through, what we can do is measure how each of the nodes is covered. So we can define several different levels of coverage of these nodes as part of the neural network. I'll let you read the slides to work out the detail. But we can have, even at the lowest level of coverage would be neuron coverage, which would be saying that each neuron in our neural network is exercised by at least one of the test sets. As I say, we could have lots of different levels of coverage there. All right, finally, I just want to talk about the need for virtual test environments. Waymo, which is the Google autonomous cars project, are way ahead of people in the number of miles they're driving on the roads, doing real testing. They've done approximately 10 million miles on the roads in 9 years. If we want an autonomous system or autonomous car to be just 20% better than a human, then we have to run 500 times that amount. We need to run 5 billion miles. We'd be waiting an enormously long time if we go on this route. Therefore, we actually need far more of the tests to actually be run in simulated environments. We need really good simulated environments. We can get some of this technology from the aviation field, where they're very good at simulated environments. If we have these simulated environments and we're running them on systems which have got lots of processing power, then we can run the tests really quickly. So we could run the equivalent of 5 billion miles really fast. And of course, if we're running the tests on these simulated environments, then we've got great control and great observability. So in the real world, the shape of this, many more of the tests would be on the simulated environments. What we don't want is to test the really dangerous stuff on the real roads, because otherwise, if we do that, we put the public in danger. But we still have to run some of the tests actually up at that level, just to give ourselves confidence that the virtual environments are representative of what the cars are going to do in the real world. So, in conclusion, if we look at the costs of autonomous systems, the testing costs are going to be phenomenally high. The costs of safety-critical systems now, which are not autonomous, are very high relative to the development costs. Our autonomous systems are probabilistic. That means we have to run more tests to actually get a level of confidence that the system is going to be safe in all situations. So if someone comes along and tells us, oh, we've built an autonomous system and the testing costs were really quite low, something's gone wrong. They're cheating somehow. Those costs are going to have to be high. So if we're looking at the sort of systems we're going to be getting in the next 2, 5, 10 years, so these are offline systems, we're going to need both black and white box testing. We're going to need new approaches to testing, which are evidence-based. At the moment, AI researchers are telling us, oh, this is a good new way of doing testing, but they give us only data on their one situation. We need independent evidence that these new test techniques actually work. As I've said, we need more tests, and we need these good virtual environments. If we move 20, 30 years into the future, we've got lots of extra dangers that we need to take into account. And currently, where we are now, because we haven't got the knowledge, this is the sort of architecture I believe our systems should be using. We can have non-deterministic autonomous systems, but we need to encase them in a safety shell so that we can have a deterministic safety software that is monitoring what it's doing, so that the output from our autonomous system is checked, so that it doesn't go outside the envelope, so it doesn't go into unsafe areas. Okay, I didn't really understand the question thing. They're coming at some other time? In which case, thank you very much.